Hi, and welcome to another session of the Game Mechanics. Today, we're here to talk about user interface, an incredibly important component of any game, and really true in narrative games as well, since there's so many different types of interactions that take place. And I'm very, very excited to have Ivan Moya with us today, an experienced UI creator and designer across many different types of video games. Ivan, why don't you give us a little intro on yourself, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ivan Moy. I've been a UI artist and a UX designer for over 15 years now. Started a long time ago going to an art school, wanted to be an illustrator, wanted to be a concept artist, but moved myself when I was working as a concept artist for a little while, found myself moved into UI art. As concept artists were the first to go in the process of layoffs and everything, I was able to stay on a little bit longer, learn about UI, became more of a UI artist, and then became more of a UX designer, UI artist, and as a whole, and that's what I've been working on for the past like 10 years now. I worked originally from games that were games of certain movies or IPs like Adventure Time or Kung Fu Panda. I mentioned moving up myself over to more double A studios where I did worked on like Vampire the Masquerade and Borderlands
Oh,
4.
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's actually start with a couple terms in there to help people understand, because often people hear the phrase UI UX and they put them together. They're really two very different things, right? And so let's break that down. You started as UI, so let's talk about like what a UI artist does, and then we'll talk about what's different about a UX designer.
Sure, absolutely. Well, for me, UI artist was just designing the look and feel about all the information that was going to be given to you, like how the player would see everything from health bars to inventory to all the screens that was already designed and by the designers themselves that I would go in there with the team and say, what will this look like? How can we present this in the most efficient and quick way for the player to get what they need and then get out and get back to the gameplay mechanics that they purchased the game for. With UI design, it was more about being an architect, about how if you want to say that if it was building a house, UX designers were the architect and UI artists were the ones who actually built the house.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I've heard it before that UX designer is the information architect, right? They're the ones who have to figure out the really hard problems of what information does the player receive at any particular point in the game, and what information or what input do they have to put into the game, and how are they putting it into the game at any particular point. And then on top of that architecture, the UI artist is the one who figures out how to make it visually attractive, compelling, and commutative. Both are really important because we've seen games with some absolutely gorgeous UI and some absolutely terrible UX, and they're almost unplayable. Pretty to look at, but almost unplayable.
Yeah, a lot of the times the focus, unfortunately, has been because we're a visual design people. So all we want to do is what it looks like. We can understand it and play, and we want to see things that look pretty. But the nitty gritty about UX design sometimes they don't think is as important, and they want to get through those deadlines and say we need to show something, and you can't show, unfortunately, a bunch of wireframes and mockups to demos at PAX or whatever it might be, or to your stakeholders. So sometimes they the UX design, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a common mistake we've talked about in many other sessions of the game mechanics of where teams often are pressured to make really pretty things before they actually have the foundations of their game established, right? All the way to the old days where people would make cinematics for their movies before the game was finished or before they even knew what the game was, and then found out that they don't connect very well. And the same is true in UX and UI. As you said, sometimes you're pressured to try to make things very pretty when you really should be working earlier on the foundation of how information goes in and out.
Yeah, the ideal situation would be the UX designer already has the functionality given to them from the designers, laid out all that stuff out. At the same time, the UI artists would be working on mood boards, working on the style guides, and then and at the same time, still be collaborative with the UX designer, unless you're the two in one, the same person sometimes
Yeah.
in some studios. But all in all, by the time hopefully the UX documentation is done, ideally the mood boards, the style guides is all done, and then suddenly everything is kind of the foundations has been built, and then we as UI artists can just start building and polishing and making things look pretty and shiny.
So the focus of the game mechanics is on specifically right now on narrative games,
Mhm.
right? So these are often RPGs, very story-centric games, visual novels, dating sims, things like that. And talk through some of the things as when you think about that genre of game And let's focus first on UX. I'm thinking about information in and out from the game. What are the things that come to your mind as the challenges that an early designer should be cognizant of?
Oh, let's see. I would say the first things you have to worry about is how the information is going to be presented to you, how easily the player can read on the information presented to them, how they can cycle through that information, especially like say if there's a lot of text to be read, if it's not one of those games that has a lot of voiceovers, but a lot of text-based stories. How is the presentation could be given to the player, and how will they navigate through that would be the very first thing that I would say you had to think about. Second, I would say, how many layers do you have to go into within narrative games? Is it all screen based on the HUD, or is there going to be a lot of background world building information that's in the submenus? So you just want to know how much is going to be there as opposed to just having just all the gameplay in the HUD.
Yeah, and I think the concept of the HUD is a really good point to touch on, right? It's been used in other sessions of the game mechanics of diegetic UI, which is often can be distinguished from a HUD. Sometimes a HUD is diegetic, but often it isn't, right? And maybe we should break that down a little bit. In a UX design concept, what do those terms mean? Like, what does a HUD mean? What does a diegetic mean?
Diegetic is one of those things I would love to see more of, but it's difficult to pull off. It's basically when the game itself, in the world of the game, gives you the meters that you're looking for. For example, in Dead Space, you could see the health bar on the back of the main character. If you're going through a game that has a candle-based situation, you can actually hold the candle and the candle is going down, so you can see your resource is going down in that sense. It's diegetic is just basically you can see the environment reflecting the information you're supposed to know, where in a HUD, your health or say your flashlight battery meter is actually shown to you in some kind of bar timer format that's clicking down as time goes on. So those are the two things that are basically very different. Diegetic is a lot more fun and is a lot more immersive if it's at all possible.
Yeah, yeah. I always think of it as like diegetic means that the device is in the world itself. Whatever's providing you that information is organic to the world and to the perspective of the character. Like you said, the candle is a great example of that. Obviously, games like cockpit simulators have a lot easier time doing diegetic, right? Because you're sitting in a cockpit and all these controls are around you in the cockpit. That's much easier to make diegetic. And then for instance, a health bar, which is very difficult to make diegetic, right? And your example of like, well, maybe a spacesuit actually is showing health to your other party members is a good example. It is really fun to be able to do that, and it breaks the immersion less, right? It breaks that fourth wall less to be able to bring people in. But it can be very, very difficult to do, especially since UI sometimes needs to convey abstractions that would have been in the world. Versus the HUD, as you said, is kind of like, okay, now this is information to the player as opposed to the character,
Mhm.
right? The diegetic would have been stuff the character could have understood, but the HUD is skipping the character and presenting information directly to the player.
And a diegetic is also much more immersive. It feels like that flashlight, that candle, that health meter on the back of your spacesuit is part of the immersion for the play for narrative games. Where in the HUD, it's like you kind of have a little bit of a removal to say, hey, this is your health in your game. It separates you a little bit, and that's where UI artists come in, and we have to say, okay, how can we make this HUD feel like it's thematically part of the world that you're building into, that you're playing around in and trying to survive or read or romance or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you for that. I think that's very useful. And in narrative games, our perspective is often not first person, right, or often even third person. Sometimes it's more of a party view. Sometimes it's an abstracted camera point of view, right? Our own characters on screen, and so that does tend often to lead you more to out of world or HUD oriented kind of solutions. Things like an inventory screen, for instance, is not a very diegetic kind of experience, right? Or even an equip screen where you're putting on armor or things like that to your character, again, wouldn't be very diegetic. But you can make it feel very thematically appropriate.
Yes, because somehow in some games you're able to go into your inventory, and then you see this in some military shooters where you go into your weapons room, and sometimes you can go and you have your weapons all hung out and laid out, and you can kind of fake that diegetic by kind of going up to it and selecting it, and then that data flows to you. So you kind of have a faux sense of diegeticness in there, but it's a technique that's usable, but not always available, especially if you have games that have a huge amount of inventory between potions, herbs, and crafting material to some games would just have a handful of maybe 20, 30 weapons, for example.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point about kind of faking a little diegetic to kind of ease your way in and out of more of a HUD experience. I think is a really good example and very applicable to narrative games. One of the most complicated things in designing data-rich games is is figuring out how that information is displayed to the player. And as a designer, the toughest thing is to realize if you can't display it, then don't use it. You know,
Yeah.
I remember many years ago, I was working on a title and we had done, it was actually a hybrid board game. And so it had a stylus and everything. It was doing all this great kind of stuff they would normally do manually. And it was now abstracting, getting rid of all that manual work. So to make a very, very sophisticated board game play very, very easily. And we weren't getting great responses from players on it. And a friend of mine who was a UX designer, not for games, just for other kinds of applications, came and looked at it and he said, show your work. You're hiding all the work you're doing. So they don't understand all the work so that they think now it's all random. They don't understand that actually, no, you're doing all of these sophisticated rules that they would have had to do manually, but because you hid all of it, they don't see it. So don't make them do it, but show that to them in a way that's engaging how you got to the number you got to, right? And it was a really kind of like eye-opening moment for me. It's like, yeah, good UI isn't about hiding things, right? It is about displaying things in a way that makes it consumable.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so that way the player feels like a sense of accomplishment once they've been able to increase their health meter, for example, or be able to increase their stamina or better level up that item that they have by seeing all that data from where they were to compare and contrast to where they are going to be. They'll feel like, wow, this is great. I've done so much in this game in the past 1 to 8 hours I'm playing this game. It makes them want to come back because they did something worthwhile and their time was well spent. So it's always good to show your homework.
I've learned subsequently, like if you can't show it, then you really have to ask, why is it in the game, right?
Is it part of the gameplay loop? Is it necessary, or is it something that you can present a layer deeper? Maybe you don't need to know this right now, but if the player really wants to know, put it down a layer deeper so that way this is where we come into a hierarchical information that we need to show the player.
Yes.
Your health has to be shown, but sometimes when you get to the point, you're like, who was the farmer who grew you the corn that you're using? Maybe you don't need to know that, but you do need to know that it is corn and it could be used in this certain recipe. So it's stages and hierarchies of information. It comes into play as a UX designer to say, how much do we need to show? And yes, show them that as much as you can. Don't gatekeep, but give the player volition, the choice to say, how much do I want to know? Do I just want to get in and out and make my recipes and do that gameplay loop for a little while? Or do I want to get into the whole world and see and read about how that these relationships form between families and or factions or whatever it might be? Just give them that choice, and they can take out of the game what they want because they had that choice, and they're like, "This is great. This game was made for me because I was able to pick and not be spoon-fed."
Yeah, I totally agree and love that example. I want to dive into it a little bit more because that hierarchical nature, right? It's like, what does the player need to make an intelligent decision now?
Yes.
Right. And that's what needs to be surfaced. And different points of time, different information should be available based upon the decision that the player is being asked to make. And the corn is a great one, right? So you need to eat. So a warrior is hungry. So you bought corn and I just have a food indicator and I'm like, oh, how much food do I have left? All right. When I go to eat, that's all I need to know. How much food, how many days of food I have left, right? When I'm planning my thing. Then later, that ability to click into it deeper to find that it was Bob who grew the corn was there. Why would I bother? I don't really care, right? So I'm only just on how many days of food I have. But then later in your story, it might be introduced that a wizard had cast a curse on Bob's corn, and anybody who eats Bob's corn is going to lose 1 point of health a day. Like now I care, right? And so I can then like, where did our corn come from? And I can dive down into it to realize, oh shit, we bought corn from Bob, right? And so I do that. Like it's that level of being able to dive into information as you need it and figure out what is the information a player needs at any particular point is actually a really delicate balancing act.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in narrative games, because from what I've always felt like it's always about interpersonal relationships in a lot of narrative games. So you just want to know before you make those decisions, what has happened previously in those storylines. And sometimes it's like, wow, if I bought corn from Bob, this works out. But if I bought it from this different person, by reading that background, by reading that information that wasn't so important at the beginning, but now is, as the relationships and the game mechanics unveil themselves as you progress, it becomes important. So yeah, it's almost goes hand in hand with going from the tutorial. All you need to know is your health is going up to now, okay, there relationships and factions matter. So suddenly the information about where you source your resources from suddenly matter. So it's part of the whole UX design saying, okay, this is when we should start revealing this, and this is when it starts becoming important.
Yeah. Yeah, let's step back a little bit even further and talk about controls. Obviously, a mouse and keyboard for a PC-based game, but do you have a sense, like when you even think about within the context of a PC game, any generalized advice in terms of use of keyboard, use of mouse, use of tracking, things like that?
Keep it consistent. Keep it simple as you possibly can. Don't get overly complicated. Especially narrative games, fortunately, is not as complicated as a MMOs or RTSs where you have a bazillion things happening that you have to access towards and whatnot. With narrative games, fortunately, it's a little bit more condensed and a little bit more simple. And keep that simplicity there so that way the player knows they can access the stories, access their actions, and access their choices quickly or slowly as much as they desire to. So there's no, I would say, need to get complicated in those actions. I mean, I know you might take examples from other games and say, oh wow, they did something really cool. But if it doesn't fit in your game, don't try to pull it in and make some kind of, like you said, a game mechanic that isn't necessary. Yeah. I mean, it's with things like text. I would say text would be keep it easy to read, keep it simple. Sans serifs, right? Simplest text, nice, a good size that's readable, nothing too complicated. I know in when you make games that have really cool narratives, you want to do something that's a little bit more cursive, a little bit more cooler looking, but you have to worry about what a player can read. So you want to make sure the information is presented to them clearly.
Yeah, you don't want to get hung up that sans serif type wasn't invented until 500 years after your game was set.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I mean, sometimes if you want to, you can always refer to it doing instead of 100%, you can do 80-20 and reserving that 20% of that cursive for more flavor, for more aside things about, say, labeling the book of the Codex book or something like that. But the more important information, of course, the 80% should be something that's clear and easy to read.
Yeah, and it's a really key point. Readability is huge. And font choice is important. Font size is also really important. And understanding who your audience is a big connection to things like choice of font size, right? If you're targeting to younger people, then you could actually get away with smaller font sizes. If you're looking at older folks like me, we appreciate a little larger font size.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, also to take into consideration your game. I mean, if your game is inherently dark, like say a vampire game, or you spend most of your time in a dungeon, your game is going to be inherently, because I just said dark, that your font sizes can be a bright white. It can be a lighter color. Wherein if you're on a land of rainbows and forests and everything, you might have to consider your font colors and font sizes a little bit more differently because everything's bright and it just kind of blurs your font choices and font colors altogether. So it's know your game. And that will help you make those decisions.
Yeah, and then I think is going back to device choices as we think about mobile, right? There are different affordances you have to think about, like a hover from a mouse doesn't translate well into mobile, where you might have a touch versus a hold, and obviously screen real estate becomes a really, really different kind of animal as you're thinking about a mobile title versus a PC title. Have you done much mobile titles or?
Only in prototyping. We were mostly a console-based or PC-based studios that I've ever worked with. Most of the mobile games that we've already prototyped for it's a new set of rules that you have to start keeping in mind. Everything's touch-based, of course. You don't have a keyboard mouse. You don't have that controller. You have limited screen space, and you have to get pretty creative in your controls. And it really forces that simplification down for you. So that way you can have that clean game without getting too complicated. So
this episode of The Game Mechanics was brought to you by Adventure Forge, an all-in-one toolkit for crafting story-rich games for the PC and Mac. Create branching narratives, asymmetric RPGs, puzzle games, and much more. No coding required, no syntax, just smart logic written in plain English. You don't need permission, you don't need credentials, you just need a story, a spark, a reason. Build the game only you can make.
And let's talk about kind of conversation interactions. Certainly, you've done a lot of that in some of the titles that you mentioned. Any kind of general guidelines in terms of things as simple as how many choices do you offer a player in a branching conversation, or how much is too much, how much is too few?
Like when we work on a Vampire the Masquerade, we started first off with like more simpler binary questions, yes and no's. So that way it kind of sets the expectation for the player to kind of get into and getting accustomed to that dialogue window. If we came up with the whole storyline and presented in front of the player and having a dozen different choices, they have no idea what that means. We found that having more choices unveiled, once you really got to know the game, once you really got to understand what in this case, the vampire factions were about, your choices actually mattered on how the game would evolve for you. So, but doing that all the way in the beginning, you have no idea how the Tremere clan acts or Gangrel clan acts like. So you're just picking randomly. But in the beginning, it was like, go pick up your armor and your clothes here, and you say yes or no. Makes it easier. So I think you can have more choices as the game goes on, but in the beginning, keep it very simple and clear for the player. Depending on your storyline, I'd say 6 to 8 choices at the very end, near the end game. If it's really story driven, you have a lot of directions to go into, but 6 I've always found to be ideal. So that way you can think about the consequences and where it can go into.
The idea of it growing over time, especially as your knowledge base grows, because I think also one of the things I love in a narrative game is to understand why I have this choice, right? So, I've learned about this clan, which now means I can ask more questions about this clan. I met Bob, so I can ask questions about Bob, right? Before I didn't know Bob existed. So why am I asking about questions about a person I didn't know, right? Things like, especially, and then something we've touched on in other sessions are things like, what are the game mechanics driving your conversation system? Is it skill-based, where it's like, oh, I get to ask this question because my intelligence is higher than the NPC I'm talking to? Or do I get to ask this question because I've built up an affinity with this character? So this character likes me, so I can ask more intimate questions or more probing questions. And those are all bits of UI and UX that you have to be able to communicate back to the player. So, because just showing up is like, it's nice it showed up, but it's more meaningful if I understand why it showed up.
Yes, absolutely. And then sometimes the designers can throw in more narrative responses that absolutely mean nothing, or it just to say, no, have like, oh wait, that's crazy, and you're like, that has nothing to do with anything, but they just want to throw that in there just for a little bit more flavor to kind of try to convey that sense of emotion in the narrative games. That you can always say, yes, I will go get and kidnap a certain person to bring back here for interrogation, or say, I ain't doing that, that's crazy. Sometimes the extra flair of choices can be thrown in there just to kind of push the narrative along of the character that you may or may not be.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? Any other thoughts that we should touch on in thinking about narrative game and UX and UI?
I would say in the narrative, it's just hopefully accessibility is there. That accessibility is important, very important. And if you have that there, you can worry a little bit less about your font sizes and you can worry about your font's readability in the background. Because if you're able to allow the players to close caption it, if you allow the players to have backgrounds against the text, it really helps them out. If they can increase the font sizes as they need to, that can help you in the long run, instead of having to choose this certain thing to make readable. You can let the player have the volition to choose for them. So that's something, if you're able to have the resources to do so, definitely try to have some of the basics these days about like font sizes and changing the backgrounds. I mean, just the dialogue backgrounds, the different levels of black for them. So that way it can go better. And make sure, if it's a lot of narrative and a lot of reading, just to make sure it's spaced out, make sure it's presented in good chunks. You don't want to give players walls of text to read through. And even though it may be wonderful writing that you've done, give it in digestible parts. You don't want to eat a full feast at one time, like appetizer to the main course of the dessert. You want to be able to in a good format.
Yeah, no, really a couple of really great subjects in there. Accessibility, meaning the controls you're giving the player on their own experience, being able to adjust the font, adjust the backgrounds for readability, adjust the font size. yeah, those kind of things, and as you said, they're not easy to do sometimes from a tech standpoint, but can make the game much more accessible if you can provide that control to the player. And the text you cannot have emphasized more, something that we've hit on in the game mechanics many times, right? Which is writing a lot is easy. Writing a little is very hard. Every time you do an edit, there should be less words than when you started. Even then, as you said, break it down into digestible chunks. Don't do the whole giant, oh, here's a 1,000-word essay on the background of the universe. It's like, figure out how that stuff should come out in little bits and drabs over the course of the experience. So each one is meaningful and digested.
Yeah, and if it's presented well, that's where codexes or bestiaries, if there's creatures to be involved, or books about herbs, that or whatever it might be, that can be put into it, all that extra 10,000 words you've got could be put into that. So for the players who do care, they'll say, I want to know more about the universe. So let me go into the codex and start reading. And they'll be like, this is great. And they can spend hours reading your work.
I completely agree. I mean, you've turned it from a push to a pull. Yeah, and instead of pushing all that at the player, which can get to be really irritating because some players don't want it, and even players who do want it, they don't want it now. But turning it into a pull where the player can go and pull that information to themselves when it's appropriate for them, I think is a really great note, and something I think more narrative games should take advantage of. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Ivan. I think it's been a great kind of foundational layer for people thinking about their game design and thinking about how they want to present it. Deeply appreciate you spending the time with us.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to help out. It's great to give advice where I can. It's a wonderful industry we're all in. It's a crazy time right now, but keep working at it and try to find some daily things that you can get done to keep going, and it'll happen for everyone and everyone.
To me, the thing that always makes me the happiest is to end the day with something a little bit more made than when I started, right? Something it's like, hey, I made something today. That's exciting. So.
Yes. It all adds up. It doesn't feel like a quarter here and a nickel that doesn't seem much, but after a little while, suddenly you've got a fortune on your hands and you're going to be doing great.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in for this session of the Game Mechanics.
Okay, thank you. Bye.